All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, August 1st, 2023 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. If you would, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll start off with roll call. Commissioner Bowie?
Present.
Commissioner Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Present.
Vice Chair Fizer?
Present.
Commissioner Manser?
Present.
Secretary Peterman?
Present.
Commissioner Kia?
Present.
Mayor Turnbow is absent tonight, and Chairman Wiggins is present, so we will have 8 this evening. We have no personal appearances scheduled tonight, so we will move into item 5 of our consent agenda. We have one item, item A, approval of minutes from the June 20th, 2023 meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Faulkner.
I move that we accept minutes from our June 20th, 2023 meeting with 3 small corrections, if I may.
Please.
In the top paragraph, list of attendees, Chairman Wiggins was here and did not get listed. In the vote on item 5A, the motion to approve minutes, Commissioner Bowie had not arrived yet, and so should have been absent rather than aye, but the count at the bottom is correct, the 601. And finally, on the last page, there were 8 ayes, and so the motion passed 8-0-0 rather than 7-0-0. And with that, I would move we approve.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a second?
Second.
We've got a motion by Commissioner Faulkner, second by Commissioner Manser, to approve the minutes from the June 20th, 2023 meeting with the following 3 corrections: 1 regarding attendees, 2 the vote on the minutes, and 3 the motion reflecting 8-0-0. Any discussion of the topic? Seeing none, all in favor? 7. All opposed? And abstentions. That'll pass 7-0-1. Thank you. We have no unfinished business this evening, so we'll move into item 7, new business. We have 3 items. We will start with item A, case number 23029, Dean Avenue Extension, second plat, final plat. If I would, should I turn city staff, or do we have an applicant to present the case?
The staff will go ahead, and then if there's any questions, we'll yield to any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Tonight you have in front of you a final plat application for Dean Avenue Extension second plat. This area would be located at the current terminus of Dean Avenue, south of North Cass, but then north of 195th Street. The total tract size for this is 14.12 acres. Ultimately, it's 2 tracks, track F and G, with some right-of-way that's being dedicated to the city. Just a little bit of history on this property. The preliminary plan for Raymore Industrial Development, or what is now Raymore Commerce Center, was approved. I'm sorry. No, yeah, that's correct. It was approved on December 23rd of 2019. The Dean Avenue Extension first plat was approved by City Council on August 24th of 2020. And then on July 25th of 2023, the Raymore Commerce Center South was approved. Just a couple of items wanted to highlight on the comments. The extension of Dean Avenue south of North Cass Parkway is included as part of the city master plan for transportation. It includes the extension that will actually touch 195th. This has always been planned. However, and another note that you'll see is that originally that was supposed to go through the Good Ranch, which would connect to Ranch Road and through 195th. Obviously, things have changed a little bit, and so this was the next best route to go west towards 71 and then connect on 195th. The city staff did apply for a governor's cost share, which will help fund this project. So we were awarded that project. And then you'll see at the dais there was a revised plat that shows like a small triangular piece of land that was not originally in what was sent to you in your packet. And then obviously there was an email thread that kind of within your packet describes this. Obviously, you have any questions, staff, as well as the applicant will be here for any questions. Staff does submit their proposed findings of fact and forward the case 23029 Dean Avenue Extension, second plat, to the City Council with recommendation of approval subject to the following condition, which is prior to the recording of the plat, the applicant will submit a revised plat showing the additional right-of-way and identifying that as it was after the review process. So, staff will yield for questions.
Thank you, sir. Do any commissioners have any questions of staff? Yes, sir, Mr. Faulkner.
Mr. Chair, so I feel like there's some confusion over which of the two copies, the one that was provided in our packet or the one up here this evening. I don't really feel like either of those is necessarily the latest or shouldn't be the latest, because on the one that was up here this evening, it has the additional roadway shown in blue, which I think is important. However, over on the left bottom margin, it says date June 30th, 2023. That's the latest date I found on the paper copy that was provided to us, missing the blue, but it says date July 13th, 2023, and it has a revision. Tract F and G are the new names, replacing the copy with the blue road that called them A and B. So I feel like what ends up coming out of this, going to City Council, probably needs to have the blue, but also needs to have the revision from tracks A and B to tracks F and G.
So I know staff obviously had received something on Monday, which to our best of our knowledge was the revision. And it sounds as though that the revision was actually a prior rendition. So I don't know where that fell or how that needed to be changed, but ultimately there was a Scribner's error of 0.29 acres, the little triangular piece. And obviously with that being a condition of approval, that would need to be checked before being second read by council.
Right. As far as we know, though, the copy that was in our packets showing that tracks A and B had been renamed to F and G. F and G are the correct names for those tracks, correct?
Those are the correct names.
So it looks like going forward, we just need to make sure that all of those several revisions get into the final copy of that plat, correct?
Yes, and that was what I was writing down as there was a brief moment of pause.
Oh, all right, that's fine, thank you.
Is there anything else regarding that piece for you, sir? Or is that?
Yeah, I'm fine with,
Perfect.
I'm fine with the response.
Any additional questions from members of the commission for staff? If not, I would entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would like to propose or make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission accept the staff proposed findings of fact and forward case number 23029 Dean Avenue Extension, second plat, final plat, to the city with a recommendation for approval subject to the condition as outlined. Should we also include in that the condition that a final survey is
I would
submitted?
suggest that the final submission include the suggested changes from Commissioner Faulkner and the red line be removed.
Perfect.
Red line, blue line, sorry.
Yes.
All right, I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
I have a motion by Commissioner Manser, second by Commissioner Faulkner, to accept the staff proposed findings of fact and forward case 23029, Dean Avenue Extension Second Plat, Final Plat, to the City Council with a recommendation of approval, subject to the condition outlined as well as the noted changes by Commissioner Faulkner regarding AB to F and G. Any discussion of the item? If not, all in favor? Seeing all hands raised, that will pass unanimously 8-0. Thank you. That will take us to our second item of new business tonight, which is item B, case number 23030, the Raymore Galleria North, Lot 3 site plan. At this time, I'd ask the applicant to please come forward and present your case.
Hi, my name is Don Webb, and I'm with the Covenant Group. I'll give you a little backstory on the project real quick. I was here in February to get a different project approved in the Willowwood Wind Center, which you guys did approve, and then when we went to close on the property, we ran into an issue with the property behind the existing center. So we've moved our project down the street a little further, next to Scooter's Coffee, and the parcel's larger, so it's 1.2 acres. We're proposing to do a 9,000 square foot multi-tenant building with a drive-through. Parking exceeds requirements. The look and feel is very similar to what we had proposed here, that we feel works well with the surrounding neighborhood. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, sir. Do any commissioners have any questions for the applicant before we move to staff report? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it. Dylan?
Thank you, sir. Tonight you have in front of you a site plan approval for 9,000 square foot multi-tenant building with a drive-through. This property is located at 1830 West Foxwood Drive, which obviously there's not a building there yet, so it's generally located east of Go Car Wash and west of Scooter's Coffee. You'll have site pictures in there from the north, south, east, and west. The existing zoning for the property is C3 Regional Commercial District. To the north, you have R1 Single Family. To the south, you have C3 Regional Commercial District with R1 Single Family. To the east and west, you have C3 Regional Commercial District. The total tract size is 1.2 acres. This was part of the Raymore Galleria North third plat, Lot 1. And the growth management plan identifies this property as appropriate for commercial development, while the major street plan identifies Foxwood Drive as a major arterial and Westgate Drive as a minor arterial. As you can see, Public Works was not here tonight, but they did want to send in a memo that just kind of outlines the utilities and kind of where everything will be located and how it will operate, and they recommend approval for this when it comes to the utilities. There are some special use conditions applied within this use. Now, one thing I want to mention is that this is essentially a shell building. So we will, there's code that will be enforced when the tenant comes forward. So there's a couple things that you may have a couple questions on that city staff will be looking, because these tenants are not finalized yet. And so it was difficult for us to require something if there's not really a for sure tenant going in that space. However, with the drive-through, it was pretty specific in the fact that with a drive-through, there would need to be some type of guardrail or wall that would be needed around the area where the pedestrians and the drive-through would connect. Right now, you'll see like some planters in there, and then when the tenant will actually come forward with their building permit, that would be when we require the wall. The other is the vehicle stacking, is just making sure that they have a minimum of 4, which they have far exceeded that. When it comes to the parking, this was another item that we'll be checking for when future tenants come forward. As it's a multi-tenant building, there's a dental office, retail, quick serve, and obviously quick serve is kind of looked at it a couple different ways depending upon the space needed on the inside comparatively to the outside with the drive-through. So all things that we'll be looking at when the future tenant comes forward. One of the other items was that depending upon the uses, so specifically office uses may not need necessarily a semi-truck that comes and delivers things. And so one of the things that we have checked for is the loading area that would be required. However, if it's all just, if it ends up being something of a lower intense use and they just get deliveries by vans, we would not require this loading area. So, in the landscaping, I wanted to apologize up front. There were some numbers in here that did not jive with the actual proposal, and so I will take full responsibility for that. But in a commercial use, there's 20% that's required to be landscaped. 32% of it's been proposed, so it far exceeds that. Also with the screening, to the south of the project is essentially Foxhaven, and so you'll notice there's a ton of foundational shrubs along that parking area to shield the headlight and vehicles from essentially those couple of houses that are right there up towards 58. They've also provided trees and shrubs for their landscape islands, as well as providing a preliminary location on where the monument sign will be, and so that will be obviously landscaped as well. Pedestrian access is going to be provided in two different areas. That'll be on the north and south of the property. The north is provided, obviously, because there's a parking lot to there, so they need to be able to cross safely across that drive-through. And then on the south side, it actually connects to an existing sidewalk from 58 that they'll be able to walk straight to the front of the building. Obviously, signage was part of this, but it was not proposed as far as how big it is, but they would need to come back for sign permits, and which staff would review at the staff level and ensure that that meets what the original intent was. Site access is provided primarily off 58. You'll notice that there is a fairly substantial median with that private access. It would be a right in, right out, which the applicant is working with the landlord or the seller of the property as far as who does what when that comes to. But then also will be the primary access of two drives on the north side from that private access drive. City staff does submit their proposed findings of fact and recommends approval for case 23030, 1830 West Foxwood Drive, site plan subject to the following 16 conditions. That would conclude staff report.
Thank you, sir. Do any members of the commission have any questions, either for staff or the applicant, now that we've gone through this portion? Mr. Faulkner.
Mr. Chair, so couple of questions for staff, I believe. On page 13, at the very top, that first paragraph talking about screening says the adjacent land to the north and east is zoned R3A, which I don't think is correct, because back on page 4, I believe those are the correct zoning.
Those are the correct zoning, yes. If you look at section 4, that area was a Scribner's area. That was not supposed to be there by any stretch.
Thanks. And also on page 18, I believe it's condition number 10, since we'll probably include conditions as part of the motion. This is commercial property, and 420.040D 3A, I believe, applies to commercial. And so taller than 3.5 feet, that is correct, I believe, but I don't think that that section of code says covers more than 25 square feet. I believe for commercial, it covers more than 8 square feet. So I think for the record, that condition may need to be. And if you've got a paper copy of the code book, it's 420-46. Lots of pages to flip.
Are you looking out of the new code book, or are you looking out of the previous PDF of the Unified Development Code?
Okay, well, so I had my copy of the code book, which I assumed was up to date, but I also checked the UDC online, and it agreed. And I don't know that we ever intended to change that provision of code. So both the height and square footage were different for, forget, commercial, and something was in paragraph A, and then all zoning is paragraph B, which was 5.5 feet and 25 square feet maximum.
So it looks like there's actually, within section 420.040, subsection D3 in this case, there's actually two sections that would apply to this. In
Right.
commercial or residential, anything above 3.5 feet or greater than 8 square feet has to be screened within commercial, so you'd be correct there.
Okay.
Within subsection B of that, though, it does say, and this is actually a recent code amendment that we had passed as part of the 35th Amendment to make clarifications to this section, because previously it only called out multifamily districts. So staff clarified a section of this code to apply to all
Right,
residential.
okay, and my copy and online did say, on B, said in all zoning.
Okay, correct. So then in your case, I do believe it was up to date.
Right, but I figured this was commercial zoning,
Yes.
so paragraph A applied, and so the condition 10 should read, covers more than 8 square feet
feet, that's
in
correct.
area, then it must be screened, correct?
Correct.
We agree? Okay, thank you. And for the moment, Mr. Chair, I also have 2 questions regarding the big prints, but those are possibly for the applicant rather than city staff,
You have the floor.
since the prints are theirs. Okay. So I apologize, I'm looking at paper and not sure how your memory is. All right, let's see if I can get the right page
Let me
without,
grab my minis.
I apologize if I accidentally whack you, Mr. Chair.
You're good.
So my first question was one that I just need to understand. On sheet A1, the building elevations, and if I hold it up here, the big one
Yep.
was much easier to see, and I could share if you like, but I was having trouble with the 3 images over on the right. The top one, to me, on the left, I'm looking at the east side of the building, and on the right, I'm looking at the north side of the building, and it's calling it a northwest rendering, and I think I probably wouldn't have gotten hung up on it if it had called it northeast. But then the middle image shows what I would call the front, the Highway 58 side of the building, which is south, and shows the quick serve drive-through, which I would call west. So I would have called that one southwest rendering, and then the bottom one is showing the 58 highway side and the side toward scooters that I would have called southeast. So,
I agree with you. Yeah, I
Okay.
agree with you. Yeah, our architects have got a little off under compass there. Yeah,
yeah,
you're-
okay,
you're good.
well, I like things to be correct, and
Yep.
and that one just kind of jumped out at me. Okay, the other one, if I don't whack our chair by accident, looks like this is page CO, the general notes, and it's all text. And so starting up at the top left, general notes, item 4, talking about contractors shall protect from damage all survey monuments, et cetera. Items damaged shall be reset by a professional land land surveyor licensed in the state of Kansas at the contractor's expense. And I realize that the engineer for this is based in Topeka, but
Project is
the engineer's seal over there on the right says state of Missouri, so I'm wondering if since this property's in Missouri, I'm wondering if
changed that
General
to
Note
Missouri,
4
yes,
should
yeah.
say.
As soon as you said it, yes, I gotta admit, I didn't read every,
So I think
correct.
I think we are final approval on this site plan, and I guess what I'd really like to ensure is simply that those couple of glitches get corrected before this gets filed.
definitely.
Those would be added as additional conditions to the 16 that have previously been identified by staff.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zur, and thank you.
Anything additional, Commissioner Faulkner?
No, thankfully.
Do any other commissioners have any questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Just one question I have for city staff would be regarding traffic around the property. I understand that North Drive is a private drive, but continually, traffic backs up on there, makes it hard to navigate to attend either business. Is there what are any options to consider there to keep it two lanes of traffic?
So I'm actually going to defer that to the applicant, because I wonder if they've maybe thought about that or have been out to the site to see the two users on each side and how busy they could be.
Yep, it'd be like particularly scooters in the morning will back up and block the one drive, or like we've all seen the car wash back all the way out the 58 highway. Or like today, lands mowing companies were there and took out one lane of traffic, so it wasn't two-way traffic on that street and everything.
Well, yeah, I was actually just there right before I came here, so, yeah, and I blocked one of those lanes when I parked back on that road. So I, as far as that, I think, you know, our entrances, we have two entrances on there, so ideally, yes, scooters doesn't back up and block them, and ideally, we would paint the curbs red out there so that no one can park out there, so that it does maintain 2 lanes of traffic.
Okay.
You know, we did look into having a side entrance coming off of the private drive coming in between, but, you know, it's a little too close to one at the front for traffic purposes and whatnot, so we've had to maintain them in the rear. I haven't been there when scooters is that busy, so I don't honestly know how far they back up.
Okay.
But we have one closer to them. We have 2 ways in off of that. One's closer to the corner of the private drive, closer to the car wash. But I agree, if anyone were to park on that street, it definitely blocks it. So my proposal would be to, you know, paint it red out there so that no one can ever stop out there for, you know, any purpose of parking.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Sir.
so staying on that same vein, that was the thing that I was thinking about was access and it being tight over there. Was there any consideration, okay, so did I read right that the applicant, somewhere in here, that the applicant has to provide some turn lane off 58 or something like that, is that correct? And that's going to alleviate any issues there? This is kind of what you guys were thinking in terms of access?
It would eliminate the potential for turning conflicts out of the site onto highway unsignalized, particularly left turns across 58 to get back on to the road. It would essentially, the purpose of that is to drive people exiting the site to Westgate Drive, where it's signalized to regulate traffic in and out of this center, as well as traffic from the south part of Raymore Galleria.
Okay, just seems like it might be a little tight squeeze in there at some point with scooters on one side and the car wash over there. It seems tight to have 4 businesses locked in right there. They get busy, you know, how's that going to look in terms of access?
What you'll see right now, without any sort of restrictions, is people trying to turn left from 58 Highway onto this private access drive further east of Westgate Drive. Right now, the center turn lane doesn't necessarily extend far enough to allow that safely. So the other purpose of that is to restrict left turns into that site and require people to use Westgate Drive to turn left on 58 into this development. The other thing I wanted to add as well is the commission knows there's about 30 or so acres north of this that are undeveloped, that are all part of the Raymore Galleria preliminary plat. So eventually, the private drive that's serving this as a connection from 58. Eventually, that road will extend further north into that development. There'll be additional areas for traffic to go to avoid backing up onto this drive. That's just the challenge with the Raymore Gallery. I think that was originally approved in the mid-2000s or before that, but it's been slow to really develop fully. You know, when the shopping center is developed, there will be more commercial development in that, so more traffic. But the point of that being that we are kind of limited right now with any off-site improvements that are needed, since there's no development activity to the north to tie those two. But in the full built-out of this center, there will be additional network of transportation essentially through that will alleviate the need for traffic to back up on that east-west backage road. The primary reason for that road is to limit direct curb cuts onto 58, which is the cause of most of the congestion that you see on 58 highway. And then the addition of that turn lane there a couple of years ago was to alleviate additional traffic that was utilizing Westgate Drive, essentially. So it was just an additional access point onto 58 to serve more of those businesses instead of each of these businesses having their own single access point. But from staff's perspective, in the future, as the rest of the northern portion of this development builds out, you'll have more access points, more access into the northern part of it to alleviate the traffic that's now just restricted from using that single east-west roadway.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments? If not, I would entertain a motion to dispose of this item, please.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. Faulkner.
let's see if I can catch all this. I move that Planning and Zoning Commission accept staff proposed findings of fact and approve case 23030, 1830 West Foxwood Drive site plan, subject to the following 17 conditions. And conditions would be, as stated in staff report, with the exception condition 10 should read that if the electrical transformer box and any other accessory utility facility is taller than 3.5 feet or covers more than 8 square feet in area, then it must be screened in accordance with section 420.040D of the Unified Development Code. And an additional 17th condition to incorporate the corrections to sheets A1 and I guess it's probably CO or C0 of the site plan.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, I have a motion by Commissioner Faulkner, second by Vice Chair Pfizer, to make sure I read it right, to accept the staff proposed finding of fact and approve case 23030, 1830 West Foxwood Drive site plan, subject to the 16 conditions that are outlined, which includes an edit to condition number 10 regarding the electric box and the addition of item 17, which is to incorporate the corrections to A1 and C0. I got a head nod from Mr. Zur, so any discussion of the matter?
Compliment you both on that motion and the recitation of it.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion of the motion? If not, all in favor? Seeing all hands raised, we will pass that unanimously, 8-0. Thank you very much. That will take us to our last item of new business this evening, which is the annual review of the Unified Development Code, to which I would turn it over to city staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, we're excited to present the annual review of the Unified Development Code. In 2012, the Planning and Zoning Commission commenced a program to essentially review the contents of the Unified Development Code to ensure that they are producing satisfactory results with projects that are proposed through the city. To date, there have been 35 proposed amendments that have been approved through Planning and Zoning and City Council, the most recent of which actually dealt with screening requirements and some confusion for above-ground utility facilities, primarily in residential districts. And so that was the most recent amendment that the commission provided a recommendation for. To date, there have also been a handful of declaratory rulings that clarified some either interpretations or confusions within the code. Recently, there have been no declaratory rulings made by the department to date. What you'll find within your packet on page 10 is a list of 3 items for review, items that have been identified by staff either as a process improvement or recurring issues that staff has dealt with, either through planning and zoning, board of adjustment, city council, or so forth. So starting on page 10, I wanted to walk the commission through each of these proposed amendments and some of the justifications for them. Within your packet, you'll find 3 exhibits that include the, at this point, I wouldn't say necessarily proposed code language, since we haven't actually initiated the amendment process yet. These are just some of staff's thoughts of how we could address some of the issues that have popped up over the last couple of months. So starting on page 10, I wanted to start with section 470.170, which currently deals with the vacation of easements, plats, or right-of-way, primarily. What staff has been seeing a lot, particularly in the Creekmore subdivision, where they historically have platted 25-foot rear yard utility easements. What you'll find right now is the code does not allow for pools to be constructed within a utility easement. So there is currently a process that's prescribed to vacate those easements. It's a very lengthy process for something that is fairly simplistic. Each of these has been approved by the council, primarily leaving about 7.5 feet for most of them, which is a standard dimension for a utility easement. When each of those is initiated, staff contacts every utility provider that we have in the city to ensure that they have no facilities in those easements. If they do, staff generally does not then support the request to vacate unless there's some sort of agreement with the homeowner and the utility to relocate the facilities out of those easements. What we've run into right now, unlike right-of-way or parts of plats, private property owners, with the exception of the actual owner where the easement is located, don't have any rights to access that easement. It's strictly for the benefit of utility providers and city utilities. The current process requires a public hearing process that's very similar to something like a rezoning or a vacation of a right-of-way area or a plat. All of those things do have a direct impact to the adjacent property owner. There's also some language in there that deals with the approval of 2/3 of the property owners, which is important for the vacation of plats or right-of-way, but a little bit cumbersome for right-of-way easement vacations, I'm sorry. So what staff has proposed within Exhibit 1 is taking the reference of easement vacations out of Section A of Section 470.170 and actually creating a subsection 2 that deals specifically with the vacation of utility easements. Actually proposes a little bit more, probably a better set of criteria to be considered that's a little bit different than right-of-way or plats, and actually gives a little bit more authority to the objection of utility providers, which currently is not codified. And essentially, it'll still go directly to the city council for consideration, but rather than sending notices to the neighboring property owners and posting it in the paper, which is what's required right now, it codifies the involvement of the utility providers and basically codifies that if the utility provider objects to it, the staff cannot support it. Right now, that's just more or less a policy decision of our department. So within that, you'll see if all of those criteria are met, the council can adopt a resolution to vacate that easement and move forward with recording it with the county and allowing the homeowner to move forward with the construction of their pool. Staff proposed this change because we have seen an increasing number in utility easement vacations, primarily just in the Creekmore subdivision. We have since worked with the developer to move away from platting those easements, so we shouldn't run into this issue with any new developments. But anticipating the number of those that may come forward in the coming years as more and more people wish to build pools, we felt that this was a little bit better process specific to that while still respecting the rights of property owners with respect to the plats and right-of-way and issues that would be directly pertaining to them. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this particular section if there are any.
Anybody have any questions? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
The second item for discussion, again, another issue that has popped up a number of occasions here, deals with fences, primarily those that are on corner lots. Some of the commission may remember in September of 2012, we adopted the 13th Amendment TDC, which included some new provisions for the location, primarily on fences on corner lots. It restricted the setback. It gave some parameters that if there were no adjoining driveways, if the homes were opposite of each other, that the owner could construct the privacy fence out to the property line. If those conditions are not met, they're restricted to locating their fence at the build line, which is generally about 25 to 30 feet back from the right-of-way. What we're running into now is that a lot of the fences in Raymore were actually constructed prior to the adoption of that. And so you're getting a lot of residents who have established backyards. They've got swing sets or items that you would have in your backyard. Those individuals have been coming forward to either replace or repair the fence, and each one of those, for the most part, have run into the issue where their fence is no longer allowed to be where it's at. And so they're settled with the decision of either I have to lose a big portion of my backyard that I've become used to, or they always have the option of going through the Board of Adjustment process for a variance, which most of them have done, and every single one of those has been approved by the Board of Adjustment. So staff identified this as a topic for future consideration and discussion. The intent of what we provided here wasn't to further create any new nonconformities, and I'll explain that in the sense that if a property owner comes forward and there's no fence on their property whatsoever, it's staff's intention to, the fence needs to be built where it should be built based on the code provisions. What we're finding is that we don't want to punish residents who are just trying to improve their property and fix their fence. And so what we proposed here is that as long as the fence is being proposed to be replaced board for board in its same location, that staff feels that that should be allowed. There's in the chapter of the UDC that deals with nonconformities, there's a little bit of ambiguity whether that deals with buildings and uses and fences, whether a fence can be considered a structure. And instead of making some sort of determination on our own, we felt that just adding a section here that dealt with nonconforming fences on corner lots was the better way to do that. We're always happy to go through the Board of Adjustment process as is prescribed, but since all of those that have gone forward have been proposed, staff identified this as a topic of potential change. So again, happy to answer any questions on this particular section as well.
Any questions regarding corner lot fences? I happen to be one of those people that has a corner lot fence, so. All right.
I actually have a question.
Oh, Vice Chair Pfizer, yes.
Not planning to replace my fence, but if I did, and say I wanted to completely change the style of fence, could I keep it where it is? Or would I have to conform to the new?
For instance, if you move from a cedar wood fence to a black aluminum.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on the circumstance. Staff would have to see the more details on that. What we ran into before in the instance, somebody is going from a chain link fence to a privacy fence. In that case, if they were doing that, staff would require them to then comply with what the provisions are for a privacy fence. What we're seeing now is that privacy fences that were once permitted are no longer permitted, and staff just desires to allow those individuals to keep the backyards that they've had. In this instance, though, actually a black wrought iron fence would have more flexibility where it's placed. Because it's not opaque, it's a little more transparent. But to answer your question, if it is not like for like or location for location, size for size, that would be an instance where staff would either still require them to go through the Board of Adjustment if they wished, or they would have to just build the fence where it is allowed by code.
Okay. Thanks.
Good question, though.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? Very good.
Excellent.
Please continue.
The last one for this evening is the subject of a previous amendment by the Planning and Zoning and City Council when medical marijuana was approved by the state of Missouri. Staff approved an amendment to the city code, the 31st Amendment, that adopted the regulations for medical marijuana facilities. In December of 2022, when recreational sales became legal, a few months after that, the state put out a little bit more guidance on how those facilities might be different from medical facilities, as well as a couple new license classifications for those facilities. Essentially, they've converted to what they call comprehensive, which means those businesses can sell recreational or medical marijuana. So staff is proposing a revision to basically an update to the 31st Amendment to bring the terms for medical marijuana conditions or facilities and replace those with what the state has put out with regard to comprehensive facilities so that we're in line with those regulations. As you'll see in the packet, they also included 2 new licenses, which are called micro businesses. The intent of those licenses were to provide a little bit better access to populations that were negatively impacted by previous marijuana regulations. And so that's what you'll find in there are 2 additional licenses that were not originally contemplated when the 31st Amendment was approved. What this does is update the definitions, and really that's it. It doesn't propose to allow these facilities anywhere where they're not already allowed or change any of the conditions for them. It strictly is just to bring this section of code into compliance with what the state is issuing licenses for at this time. So that concludes staff report on that item, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Faulkner, I see you pushing the button. Go for it.
Telltale. So, Mr. Zur, I feel like Mr. Gress may have already given me an answer. I wanted to ask, is the word comprehensive in our proposed new wording, is that coming from state ordinance?
It is. It's coming straight from the statutory provisions that
Okay.
have been adopted under Amendment 3. I would note for the just educational purposes, there is reference with regard to the micro business wholesale facilities, the micro business dispensaries. I have not yet seen it. There have been comments made from at least one of the attorneys representing the entities. In my view, it has always been those were established in order to identify populations and areas of town where drug enforcement had been difficult or had limited the ability to have active businesses. And so I think, in fact, we talked about it earlier today at my Rotary meeting, where there was a difficulty in getting micro businesses into a community such as Raymore based upon the population and neighborhoods that may have been negatively impacted by drug enforcement. You see it in there. I think that it is subject to potential litigation in the future where they may be able to say, hey, it's population or the community, but I think the intent had always been under Amendment 3 that it was combining both of them to allow for legal dispensary sales in communities and populations that had been previously hard hit.
Thank you. I didn't have any issue with the micro business in reading through this without any other knowledge of the state statutes. I found changing the word medical to the word comprehensive, it got ungodly monotonous, and I personally felt that the word comprehensive didn't add anything to it, should have been struck. But if it's coming from state, then it makes...
The definitional terms will match with state regulation and state statutes say.
So I'll leave it alone. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments regarding item 3? All right.
To wrap it up, items for future discussion, and these would be things that staff has identified as important, but not necessarily at this time, probably a more involved process. The first one would be a sign code update, and this is one that I think the commission has seen a couple of times. Because of a number of court cases, and Mr. Zur can elaborate on that a little bit more if necessary. Essentially, a lot of cities are having to wrestle with their sign codes that are essentially have been ruled as illegal because of how they regulate the content of signage and not just the time, place, and manner. So this is something that it will involve a pretty in-depth look with probably legal counsel and city staff to look into that. I will say, from the city codes that I've seen, I think ours is in pretty good shape. There aren't a lot of things in there that I think could be interpreted as out of line from some of the rulings that have been made, but there are still some references to whether there's a commercial message or a non-commercial message. But a lot of what we regulate in signage has to do with the size of it, the location, how long it can be placed out, and so forth. So this would be something that staff would bring forward in probably maybe a work session format, either with the commission themselves or with the city council, to make sure that A, it meets the intent of some of those rulings that have been made, but also B, that into the future, the signs that are being approved, since those are done at the staff level, are satisfactory with both of those entities within the city.
Mr. Bowie?
What's an example of content-based signage?
Within our code, right now, there's a couple of provisions. It can be a commercial message or a non-commercial message. So the intent of that is if you have to look at the sign to understand what it's telling you and you're restricting it based on what it's saying, that's not constitutional. It regulates your freedom of speech. You should be able to say whatever you want on your sign. What should be regulated is where you can put that, how long you can place it out, how large that sign can be. I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but
Mr. Zur is queued up here.
You've got political signs, obviously. It's gone as far down with regard to court cases as to for sale signs. Is that a commercial speech? Yes, it's a commercial speech. Can I put it up whenever I want to put it up? The extent of advertising for our snipe signs, those are all been part of litigation that's come through. But again, Mr. Gress is absolutely correct. If you read the sign and the content of the sign, the actual language that's on it, has any type of restriction associated with it other than color, size, or location, that's where cities are getting in trouble.
When you say restriction, you mean like if somebody is a politician and they submit a sign and you're saying, oh, you can't say that on your sign? Is that what you mean by restriction? I guess it's just,
Nope.
it's such a vague
Whether or
statement.
not that you can put up signs, because there's language with regard to placing signs outside of election periods.
Right.
We have restrictions that talk about placing signs outside of election periods, and there is question as to the legality of if I'm a member of the community, can I put up a sign that simply has a political stance or a political statement from this point forward and leave it there? It doesn't have to do or relate to any particular election or candidate.
So that gets really hairy because, you know, if somebody wants to put a sign that is profanity, but yet it meets all the regulations, it's the right size, the right colors, whatever our restrictions are, right? But it has profanity on it, right? That's free. That's free.
All of these are things that the courts are chewing on right now, will continue to chew on in the future, and all we can hope to do is, at the time, right now, identify code provisions that we think are the safest for the city.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And I would clarify, the bulk of our enforcement, not really with respect to what needs to be changed, really deals with snipe signs, signs that are put up in the right-of-way or at an intersection or up on a utility pole. Right now, those just aren't allowed by the code regardless of what they say. But I would say those are the bulk of what you're asking questions about is, can I put this sign in my front yard? City staff generally will never come pull somebody's sign in their front yard based on what it says. It's only if it's placed in the right-of-way or if the sign exceeds the size limits of what the code says it can be. Because we have had some instances where people have put up some pretty vulgar signs throughout the city, and generally we are only allowed to remove those if they're not in the location where they're allowed to be.
Homeowners associations are getting themselves in deeper and deeper when it comes to these.
The next topic would be an update to our land use table within the Unified Development Code, both from the Planning and Zoning Commission, City Council, and even the residents as well, have voiced some level of concern with the types of uses that are recurring that come forward as being proposed and approved. And staff always leans back on if it says it's an allowable use within the code, it has to be allowed as long as it meets the criteria that's included in the code. Staff feels that based on where we're at as a community growth-wise, it's time to evaluate the number of similar uses that we have in the community and figure out if those are things we want to continue to allow by right, or if there are some uses that maybe should become a little more restrictive. And I don't want to point anything out right now, but you know, auto-oriented uses, I won't get into the specifics, but right now there are a lot of uses that are allowed by right that we have gotten a little bit of concern on from a couple of different levels that we have too many of those. So part of that would be kind of an analysis of uses within the city, comparisons to other communities of our size. But we're just at a point right now where we're in the middle of a growth spurt, and so we need to evaluate, are these the same types of uses we want to continue to allow by right, or do we want to add some additional restrictions for those individual uses? The other thing to think about, and I'll give the example because it's open now, I think some of the uses in the code are a little outdated, and I say that because when Johnny's Tavern opened in a commercial shopping center across the street, staff had a lengthy debate as to whether or not is that a tavern or is it just a restaurant. They serve alcohol like a tavern would, but not the primary thing that they serve. Within the code, a tavern requires a conditional use permit, public hearing, something that, with the intent of the Raymore Marketplace, sit-down restaurant was something that was probably always contemplated as part of that. It really should be something that's either maybe a bar and maybe not so vague as a tavern. So there are some things in there that maybe need to be clarified so that they're not, I wouldn't say confusing, but so ambiguous when uses like that come forward. And so that was the thinking and rationale behind this, is right now there are some general terms within our land use table that could probably be expounded upon. Nowadays, you see a lot of, say, like artisan type companies that aren't necessarily a full-blown retail business. It's a little bit smaller scale. Right now, our code really only breaks it down to larger than 10,000 square feet, smaller than 10,000 square feet. So are there uses in there that maybe are retail commercial in nature, but not in line with what the code would identify a retail center or retail space to be? And so, again, part of this would involve researching other communities and figuring out into what detail do their codes get into, and how does that compare to what Raymore has. There's a lot of potential in our large undeveloped properties for a lot of mixture of different uses, and so staff feels this would be an opportunity to likely, again, in a work session format with City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission, to just explore, are there uses out there that aren't explicitly covered in the code, uses that the leadership would like the city to start attracting to the city, just to make sure that those uses are clearly identified in the code and they're not necessarily so ambiguous, because sometimes that does create gray areas that aren't necessary. So that would conclude the staff's perspective on that item.
Any questions regarding land use table update? All right, third and final.
All right. The last one, in 2023, staff had a work session with the City Council, and I believe we may have discussed this with the Planning and Zoning Commission as well at that meeting. There are a number of Airbnbs, I wouldn't say a ton of them throughout the city, but there are a number of them within Raymore that are operating right now, as well as long-term rental housing within the city. The discussion with the council and the commission at the time was really focused on Airbnbs and whether or not there should be regulation. It was actually the direction that staff received at that meeting was to maybe look at an overarching program that had to do with just rental properties in general. A lot of the issues, and this comes from a code enforcement standpoint more than a planning and zoning standpoint, is establishing a line of communication between the owner of the property, the occupant of the property, and the city. If there's a property maintenance issue, particularly if it's an out-of-state landlord, it is very tough to get a hold of the right person to fix those issues. And so what the staff, the direction that staff received was to create some sort of registration program as a starting point, just to get a baseline of contact information for the city to contact when there is an issue. So that is what staff has been exploring for the last couple of months with code enforcement staff and other people in the department. But that would involve likely some updates to the property maintenance code itself in terms of licenses that might be required or information that's necessary for somebody to obtain a rental registration permit or something of the like. So still some work to be done on that item, but again, that would involve some amendments primarily focused on the property maintenance code, which is a part of the Unified Development Code. So open to any input and feedback on that item as well.
I'd say I'm very against any registrations of short and long-term rental registration programs. I guess is the point, at this point, is the purpose of this registration just to figure out how many short-term and long-term rental units are out there? I mean, is it kind of like a survey in the form of a code?
I would say it's part of that is the reason. Right now, we could estimate based on ownership records and mailing addresses within the city, whether it's an owner-occupied home or it's not. Either the mailing address for their property with the county is that address, or it's somewhere else in the metro or the country or the state. So staff can generate a list pretty quickly of non-owner occupied housing. It primarily is those that create, I wouldn't say they're the problem, but it's the nature that a lot of the issues that arise because of code enforcement problems become the landlord's responsibility in terms of cutting the grass or fixing fixing part of the roof. I can't think of any specific examples, but a lot of times the tenant isn't always responsible for that, and a lot of the times what happens is we get referred to a property maintenance company that also isn't necessarily responsible for that. So there's a web of communication that happens to try and get those problems resolved, and the only thing that the residents around that property know is that it's not solved yet, and so they become frustrated with staff because the problem hasn't been solved yet. So the intent behind that is really just to establish who is the person that's responsible for that property, who can the city contact when there is an issue. What you've probably seen in other cities are inspection programs or permits that have to be renewed each year. That's not necessarily intent here. We're not to the point where there's enough short-term rentals to require any sort of inspection program, and that's also very staff intensive, which we really don't have the staff for at this time either. So the specific direction was given that inspections should not be part of that. It should just be kind of a repository of information. I'll kind of compare it to, for commercial businesses, the city clerk has emergency contact information for every business in the city. So if an alarm goes off at Nose Jewelry, we know exactly who to call and who to reach out to get that taken care of. Right now, we don't really have that for residential properties in the city. We have Property Maintenance LLC from Boca Raton, Florida. Not an exact phone number. So that's the intent behind it. Not anything to create any additional regulations. It's just establishing that line of communication.
I understand, and my stance against it is, it is a step towards the direction of further, regulation and whatnot. So that is kind of the purpose behind my stance against this.
Mr. Zur has a comment to add.
I can simply attest for the commission the dearth of cases that I am handling for UDC enforcement before the municipal court here in Raymore that are associated with everyone playing a hot potato, whether it be, no, the tenant's not responsible, but the tenant's there, boots on the ground, property management company plays hide the ball, and then property owner is some out-of-state, unidentifiable, uncontactable, can't serve, and can't call them into court for anything other than a, hey, please show up. So this is an effort to try and hold individuals' feet to the fire, whether that be a property management company that the individual identifies, which I'm fine with. If the property owner wants to identify the management company as any issues you've got, need to go to that location. You can write him a citation or them a citation for their maintenance of the property. I am fine with that. It doesn't need to be registered solely to the individual owner. I just need to be able to have someone that I can write a citation for if there's a property problem.
So, if I can?
Sure.
Sure. I like the idea a lot because it's a level of accountability and responsibility that if I'm a resident, right, I live on a street and there's a rental house down the street, I want the city to have access to as many numbers as they can to fix that problem that's going on down there. So I really like it for that reason. But my question is, or my statement might be, do you have the wherewithal to enforce? Do you have enough staff and everybody that can enforce if you do some type of registration for landlords or something like that?
I do think the city has the framework for that. We've worked with our water utilities department. That's where people come to turn on their water and put utilities in their name. When they do that, on their application, they have to indicate whether they own the property or rent it. The intention behind that is if they check rent, okay, then you get this registration form of information that has to be provided before the city will release that to be put into their name. I don't think it's foolproof by any means, but I think it's a step for improvement. So I would say the framework is definitely there to implement this. What we definitely don't have the staff and manpower for would be what other cities are looking at with the inspections. I think Raymore has a new enough housing stock to where that's not an issue yet. That's not to say it may not be something we have to revisit in a couple of years, but I do think the framework is there with the staff that we have and some of the processes that are already in place to make this another step in that process.
Any additional questions or comments regarding this item?
Just one additional
Please.
thing.
Yeah.
This just seems like more of a code enforcement issue than a, landlord-tenant type issue. I guess if there's firmer code enforcement policies and procedures, then, that's going to create incentive for a landlord to be held more accountable. If there's monetary penalties for codes not being met. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything I can do to pull in an owner or a property management company who can stand before the judge and hear it's going to cost you $200 for not mowing that 12-inch grass.
$200 a day. That'd be more incentive for them to do it, I think.
Yeah, but if you can't get to the end point where the person who is the LLC registered in Delaware with a mailing address in Boca Raton, Florida, Jonathan, can stack up $100 million worth of fines. Doesn't matter if you can't
Right.
actually have somebody to collect.
So
I think
as
is the
a
issue.
landlord, I understand it from both sides, right? I totally get it from one side of it, but then as a citizen, I want to hold the landlord responsible, and I'm a responsible landlord. But there's a lot of landlords that aren't responsible, and I think this is a good way to do it. So,
And there's an argument to be made for your local landlords who are managing their properties as opposed to a non-local, and I'm going to call it foreign landlord, it's outside of the state of Missouri, who has zero accountability. I mean, I appreciate Commissioner Bowie's position on this, which is he's there, he's going to receive the complaints, he's going to address the problems that he has or might have with regard to any of the properties that he is controlling. I don't have that ability to enforce if I'm trying to reach out to someone in Albuquerque or more often Chicago.
And I'll jump in here. My house was a rental property before we bought it, and there were like dead pines on the property that I know a neighbor had called and complained multiple times. And the city couldn't do anything about it because they didn't know who the actual landlord was to go after them and get them to remove the trees. So I got a nice little welcome letter when I finally purchased the home and was living in it.
That happens often.
So, from that standpoint as well, I think, to Commissioner Bowie's point, I think it makes sense to have something along these lines. And the landlord actually just lived in Lee Summit. So it wasn't even Albuquerque or Boca Raton or whatever they're throwing out there. This was someone literally 20 minutes away that we couldn't find because they weren't identified as the actual homeowner.
Could a possible solution be placing liens on a home? Is that an option that we have as a city?
Only if I get a judgment indicating they're in violation. Or I have something that presents as an imminent health, safety, and welfare issue.
Okay.
And the flip side of that, I have other buddies who own rental properties. In fact, I just had a conversation with one today on the whole new property taxes for Jackson County. He owned property there, and he didn't receive any notice on the property that he owned about the changes in his, or how to appeal it, because they didn't have his correct information. So I think there's also that benefit for the landlords, if we know who they are, to make sure that they're aware of those types of things that also impact their property.
To tack onto your comment, because that is something that was discussed. Right now, the city does have an arrangement where code issues that go unabated by the property owner or tenant, and the city does move in to abate those items. If those bills are not paid by either the tenant or the property owner, the city does have the ability to place a special assessment on the property, which we do. But I will say I can think of 5 properties off the top of my head that those taxes have gone unpaid, and that's no fault of the city since the county collects those, and if the owner doesn't pay, they don't pay. But it all comes back to establishing the one responsible party who either has to pay that tax bill so the city is reimbursed that, or answer the citation or violation letter that is sent in the mail. It's just our recurring problem is not being able to have that one person or one entity that we can contact that we know is absolutely responsible based on the fact that they signed that agreement, whatever that might look like if we do move forward with that.
the other problem with liens is that liens take a long time, right? We need to get this done right now. We need to call somebody. Sometimes when you can call somebody, you can get it done pretty quick, as opposed to a lien that might take 6 months, 4 months, so just look, from a citizen standpoint, from a person that lives there standpoint, a resident, it's just quicker to have somebody maybe you can contact.
I'm all about code enforcement, whether it's, an owner, landlord, whatever. It's not trying to get around anything like that. Just as someone who does, manage a property here in Raymore, that would be a little burdensome. And a little burdensome could be the difference in someone investing in Raymore or not, or going to Belton or going to the next city. So that's kind of that's the reason behind my stance, and I'm one vote, so.
If that's the most burdensome part of being a landlord, you got a pretty good tenant, man.
If there are no further questions, what staff would look for this evening is kind of a consensus on the review and the direction to staff to go ahead and initiate the process for the 36th Amendment, which right now would include items 1 through 3 within your report this evening.
All right. Any thoughts or questions or objections before? Otherwise, I'll just take a thumbs up poll. Thumbs up to have them proceed, since we don't have to formally vote. Well, right? I mean, or I guess, Mr. Zur, this is actually, well, I guess it is. It's an annual review, so it is. I would need a motion.
I would think that if the commission doesn't have any objections, the staff will proceed according to the proposals provided.
Well, since this is an actual item of new business, though, however, we would need a motion.
Now, I'm never going to turn away an actual action for purposes of getting a minute. I think in the past, however, the staff has been able to proceed forward without direct action. I'm sure Emily would appreciate having a vote.
All right. So for formality purposes, could I entertain a motion to dispose of this item, please?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would like to make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission accept the topics for consideration with no corrections or objections.
Perfect. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Manser, second by Secretary Peterman to, now that I asked for it, I got it all mixed up, to go ahead and move forward with the 3 recommendations as outlined. Cool. Always got to make it weird. All right, any discussion on the item? Seeing none, all in favor? That's 8 thumbs up, 0 opposed. Thank you. All right, so we'll just go ahead and move on and put this awkwardness behind us. So that concludes new business for this evening. So that'll take us to item 8, our city council report. Mr. Zur.
Thank you, Chairman Wiggins. I'm happy to provide a city council report this evening. Since your last meeting, there were 2 city council meetings. One was scheduled for July 24th, at which there was nothing of consideration from the Planning and Zoning Commission's position. Prior to that, however, there was a July 10th meeting. During the course of the July 10th meeting, there were a couple of items of particular note simply because of actions that you anticipate seeing moving forward based upon your most recent vote. For example, there was provision including a public hearing for a vacation of an easement on 412 Westbrook, the 15th and final plat, and in a similar easement vacation where a public hearing was held on lot 415 of Westbrook 15th final plat too. So with luck moving forward, we will be able to make that a more administrative and streamlined process in order to remove those from the council public hearing provisions. In addition to that, we had 2 other items. One was the Grant Park Villas, the final plat. This was before the Planning and Zoning Commission on June 20th. During the course of that time, it was a 3.8 acre tract. Justin Zimmerman of Zimmerman Properties LLC seeking to proceed forward with a 48 unit apartment complex. There was also a discussion and approval for a second reading of the code amendment of Chapter 610 regarding peddlers, solicitors, and canvassers, making distinctions there, requiring obviously licensure and what obligations and requirements the city can impose upon them. Less planning and zoning, more citizen input and concern. If you are a peddler, solicitor, or canvasser, please make sure and check your code provisions before wandering your neighborhood to hand out materials. That's all I've got.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn it over to staff for staff report.
Thanks, sir. Just one item for me. Our next regular scheduled meeting is actually kind of tentative right now, so I'll definitely be in contact with you as we only have 1 application. This is for a retail space with a drive-through, 2,000 square feet. It's a HTO. They're working through a couple of things, and so mark your calendar for August the 15th, but I will be in touch if something changes. I'll hand this over to Mr. Grass.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, because of the timing with this being the first, there were no monthly reports in your packets. I should have those wrapped up tomorrow once I receive the last bit of data that I'm waiting on. So I'll email those to the commission once those are finished. We did have an uptick in permitting this month, which was exciting. So hopefully that means things are picking up housing construction wise. But be on the lookout for an email from me tomorrow with the rest of that report. And then lastly, you're probably wondering who the young lady sitting all the way at the right end of the table. She is not from Public Works or Engineering. That is our new Economic Development Director, Mrs. Lee. And so we wanted to invite her to the commission meeting tonight to introduce her. Felt it was appropriate with at least one new development on the agenda this evening. So look forward to her being at many more meetings moving forward.
Welcome.
And that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. I guess do you have anything to add tonight, Ms. Lee?
I don't really have anything to add for the betterment of the group, but I'm excited to be here and excited to attend more planning and zoning commission meetings and bring more development to Raymore.
Thank you. Let's see, that will take us to item 10, public comments. Does any member of the public wish to make a comment? No? Got the hand wave, thank you. That'll take us to commission member comment. I'll start, I usually don't start on my far left because of the mayor, but since he's not here tonight, I will turn it over to Commissioner Urquilla.
As always, just want to thank the staff for everything you guys do. Yeah, welcome, and good to see everyone after a little bit of time, because I know I missed the last meeting on top of not having any meetings in July. So nice to see everybody.
All the way to the right, Commissioner Bowie.
Welcome. You mentioned earlier the Raymore Galleria North potential tenants. Since we're beyond that case right now and we're not deciding on anything, do you have some potential tenants for that or no?
So I know for sure their anchor tenant is going to be a dental use, but there's been some potential users for the drive-through area. It's been tossed around being Swig, but it has not been a confirmed for sure that is happening. Obviously, this originally started out with like a 6,500 square foot with Willow Wind, which was just going to be 2 to 3 users. So obviously, if they're proposing 5, they've maybe found a couple more. They've just kind of kept us in the dark about it.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. But thank you guys, appreciate it. Good to be back.
Commissioner Smith.
Welcome, Ms. Lee. It's been a very informative meeting. I appreciate all the work you guys have done while we've been off for a month. So,
Commissioner Manser.
Thank you to staff. Thank you, Jerry, for your attention to detail. You do have spectacular attention to detail, and you catch a lot of the things that would otherwise go unnoticed, but could make a difference. So I appreciate that. And thank you guys for bearing with me while I stated my opposition.
Vice Chair Fizer.
Thanks to staff for keeping us informed and prepared for meetings, and welcome to our meetings. I just want to say I've sometimes when I'm bored, I'll drive around and look at all the things that we've done or the things that are being built, and it's pretty exciting sometimes to see just how much is happening around town. So whenever you're bored, get in your car and drive around and take a look.
Secretary Peterman.
Thanks, staff, for the sharp shirts that we get to wear. Only took a year or so, but that's fine. Wow. Anyway, I know they were trying. And welcome. That's all I got.
Commissioner Faulkner.
Welcome to Ms. Lee. Thank you to staff. And in response to Vice Chair Fizer's comment, I noticed this evening gas had jumped 20 cents a gallon since I looked. I thought it was yesterday. And since Raymore is a very walkable community with lots of trails and more sidewalks, maybe we could go for a walk instead of a drive.
I think that's a good idea. Maybe when it's a little cooler.
Well, no, it's way too hot right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me that my upcoming road trip's going to cost a whole lot more than it was originally. Welcome, Ms. Lee, again. Staff, as always, thank you for everything that you all do. You talked briefly about an applicant coming up, it would be up on the corner right next to the fueling station, is that correct? It was it HTO, is that what the?
HTO, yes.
The iced tea company from Texas.
Yes.
With that potentially coming, I was just kind of curious, it rattled some thoughts in my head and didn't know if we've heard anything lately about, was it the Grove out here, or whatever, that was the old Hy-Vee area. I mean, I know sometimes there's things that can't be talked about, and I fully understand and don't want to put anybody on the spot, but always curious about things like that. If we've heard of anybody being interested in the old Minsky's spot, you mentioned Johnny's earlier, so that brought up Minsky's in my mind. So just always curious, and then, yeah, obviously we'll never put you on the spot, and if you can say just more to come, I understand. I don't want to, but just always curious where things are headed.
I will say that there is more to come,
Perfect.
but we are still in contact with people on a regular basis.
Perfect. I apologize, I should have been looking more towards you. I will get used to that. Other than that, thank you as always, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a great 4th. It's hard to believe that it's already August. So those of you with children getting ready for back to school, yikes. Lots to do in little time. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Manser,
I'll move that we adjourn the meeting.
do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Manser, second by Secretary Peterman to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Passing unanimously, 8-0. We are adjourned. Thank you.